Okay, everyone, I'll keep this really short. Just to kind of remind you, the French Revolution ends up in the beginning in like 1789, 1790 to be pretty calm, and there is a interest, in a lot of Americans to support the French Revolution. But in that time period of 1792 into 1793, which is during Washington's administration, we see a much more kind of the reign of terror and first the beheading of the monarch, and then later the reign of terror. There becomes much more challenge and debate about the effects of revolution. And so, as you place on the timeline things like the Whiskey Rebellion and whatnot, you can kind of keep in mind the French Revolution and where people's minds are regarding the overall kind of way in which republicanism can go. So some of the case study of the French Revolution just ends up being part of the historical context, okay, in addition to some things that are happening within the United States. In terms of tensions with England, one of the big issues that happens in Jay's Treaty is that you still have quite a bit of British input in the West. Remember, the Brits are also in Canada, so you have pretty significant, British space, north of the Northwest Ordinance. But you also have a great deal of, kind of, interest in trying to push Britain out. And this is what Jay's Treaty is about. Part of the treaty is also about some British harassment on the seas. And, Jay, arguably, John Jay, doesn't necessarily get everything he wants. There's a lot of influence from Hamilton in this treaty because he's very favorable to England, and a lot of criticism that John Jay could have been a little bit harder on England. And, was this a potential like redo of a war with England, which, the United States does fight a second war with England in 1812, the War of 1812. So it's not so far into the future that the United States and England are going to come at it again. So, a couple of issues still, create some degree of tension. And so the foreign policy issues with Britain are creating some tension. In John Adams' presidency, we also see a continuation of these issues, especially with France. And so, John Adams is a Federalist. He is elected, and you can see the electoral vote. He gets 51% of the electoral votes. The alternative candidate was Thomas Jefferson, who gets the second most votes. So even though he's like kind of a different political party, they are president and vice president. We don't really have tickets at this point. It's not until the 12th Amendment to the Constitution that we actually have our election system working a little bit differently, where the president and the vice president run together on one ticket. In this case, it's like the first place and the second place, individuals are granted, the presidency and the vice presidency. So this will create some tension. We would expect that Hamilton and Adams would get along, really, really well because they're both Federalists. But they personally hate each other. So despite the fact that Jefferson and Hamilton are really, really, friendly, sorry, are not friendly at all, we also see, a souring of Hamilton with Adams. And some of that is just, personal and personalities. John Adams is from Boston. He is a Federalist and generally somebody who's probably a little bit more moderate of a Federalist, although he increases his extreme Federalist ideas during his presidency because some of it comes out of, him being targeted. But his presidency is significant. He will be president for 4 years, and then Jefferson will take over in 1800. Thomas Jefferson, of course, is a Democratic Republican, and he's going to be at odds with Adams most of the time. He's also a Virginian, of course, a slaveholder. I think of all the people on Jefferson's estate, and there's like 700 of them, most of them are enslaved, and only one person, was really able to vote, a white male with property, and that was Jefferson. So you really have, kind of, even though he is seen sometimes as like a populist farmer agrarian, keep in mind he's also representative of somebody who's a slaveholder, as are many of the other founders who are from the South. And then lastly, the XYZ affair. The French start to test a great deal of American military ships. They're seizing ships, and there is some American envoys who are sent, to meet and to negotiate. The French demand a payment and basically, try to bribe the United States folks. And the United States ends up balking at this. It becomes in the United States like a very big blow to U.S.-French relations, and there's a great deal of like egg on the face of the people who are supporters of France. And so this is an interesting topic. There's a lot of political cartoons that are very much satire about this, so that's kind of a topic to look into. And then, of course, the quasi-war, which ends up being essentially the United States, despite the neutrality proclamation under Washington and, the farewell address and things like that, the quasi-war generally does create a U.S. French war. And it does become very difficult for the United States to stay neutral. Ultimately, the United States will terminate its alliance with France to try to move greater toward neutrality. The last thing is the Alien and Sedition Acts, and these become really significant in a way to try to tamper down dissent. One of the fears at this time is, revolution. Some of the context here to look at is some of the diversity within the United States at the time, increasing numbers of people from France, from Germany, from England. So you're getting, in some cases, some very personal interests that people have. And John Adams is very worried about there being, when you see the word alien, this is a word that generally is talking about immigration. And naturalization is the process of becoming a citizen. So some of the things that Adams is starting to affect include immigration policy, also includes naturalization policy. How difficult or easy is it for some people to become citizens? So this gets into topics that maybe we're familiar with today, we're hearing about a lot today. And then, of course, the Sedition Act, which has to do with the way in which people say things against the government. And the Alien and Sedition Acts become, really significant. Just to see some of the naturalization laws that change. In 1790, there was no kind of notice at all required, and you had to be somebody in the United States for 2 years in order to naturalize as a U.S. citizen. By 1795, there's a notice that you have to give in advance, and the residency period is 5 years. And by 1798, so this is the administration of John Adams, you have 14 years of residency required before somebody is a U.S. citizen, somebody who's voting, and the target, is clearly English and Irish immigrants who might vote for the Jeffersonian Republicans, or somebody who is it's really supposed to be the French and the Irish immigrants who would likely vote for the Jeffersonian Republicans, less so the English. Okay, in any case, that's a little bit of info. I hope that that helps to give you an idea of the topics and the debates. We'll see you tomorrow in class. Okay, if you have a question, just let me know.